Welcome back to Comic Book Nation, the only show that does it all for geek culture. And if you're joining me today, host Kofi Outlaw, we are doing this special bonus round episode talking about the one, the only Oppie, aka Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. And today, for this discussion, I've invited two of my comic book co-workers who also enjoy the fine art of cinema. And that would be my buddy, Mr. Connor Casey, who you guys know from the show.
Boom.
And daily distraction host, interviewer extraordinaire, comic book personality guy. And I hear he also does some comedy on the side sometimes. Mr. Chris Cillian is with us.
Hey, yes, fellow cinephile. How you doing, man?
I'm doing all right. Shout out to Patrick Kavanaugh. He couldn't make it because we had to reschedule this, but he did the last bonus round episode about Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, and he had thoughts on Oppenheimer. But you can read Patrick's review of Oppenheimer, the official comicbook.com review that is up now on comicbook.com movies. And also, we had our Barbie review because we got to get into the Barbieheimer of it all somewhere in this discussion. But Barbie's also opening this weekend, and we have our official Barbie review up. So go to comicbook.com movies, and that is comic book, all one word. And be sure to check out both of those, in addition to listening to this podcast about Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. So let's get right on into it. No more preamble needed. We're going to be talking about Oppenheimer, and we're going to do this in two stages for people who may want to download our podcast. I know a lot of you are now subscribing to Comic Book Nation on your podcast platforms and on YouTube, but you might be getting this content before you get to see the movie. So we're going to do this in two steps. First, we're going to go around and do our instant reactions to Oppenheimer. We all saw this at the same screening last night here in Nashville, Tennessee, on the glorious IMAX. So we got the full presentation. So we're going to go around and give some spoiler-free reactions to the film. Then we'll take a break, and then we'll come back, and we will get into our full kind of spoiler-filled discussion of Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. So you're safe to listen no matter whether you've seen the movie or not. All right, so I'll just kind of take it off at the bat, get my whole blurb out of the way so you guys can do the much more entertaining job of talking through this. And as I put out on Twitter, I think that Oppenheimer is definitely a 3-hour talkie of a film. I use that term with movies that are just mostly kind of dialogue driven and scenes of people having conversation. This movie is almost entirely that for 3 hours. And on paper, to a lot of modern moviegoers, that might sound like, oh no, a red flag or something, but it really isn't. I found this movie strangely compelling and kind of gripping. I think I said half jokingly, but not really, it was hard to kind of spot a bathroom break for me. And like at which part I could actually get up and feel like, oh, there's not going to be much to this scene. I can just leave. It was really hard to do. And even when I did it, I was like, yeah, I definitely missed something, compelling. Because I think in many ways this is, and I said this also, I think this is Nolan's best edited film in terms of we know this director loves to play in different time periods or places at once and kind of cut them together in this non-linear kind of, but still fashion that still reveals a story and a theme and character arcs from his very first breakout with Memento through films like Dunkirk to what we're getting now in Oppenheimer. So this story is also that Nolan non-linear where we're seeing J. Oppenheimer as a young scientist, and then as the guy is the head of the Manhattan Project, and then in the years after World War II, going into the Korean War, the 1950s, McCarthyism and all of that, and even sometime kind of through that period into leading to the 60s. So this covers a lot of time in this man's life, and this is one of the more interesting portraits of him. But as we'll get into when I get to my tinfoil hat time, I enjoyed the movie very much as a portrait of J. Oppenheimer and what he represents to modern history as the quote-unquote father of the atomic bomb. And it's just really kind of compelling stuff with a big cast of actors. I was sitting next to Connor Casey, and I remember every time somebody would pop on the screen, he'd point like almost like the Leonardo DiCaprio meme. He was just like, oh, it's, so-and-so. But a lot of faces show up in even the bit performers in here. Whether it's Benny Safdie or just people who just show up, like Josh Peck, I think, shows up in it. Josh Hartnett has this kind of recurring role in the film. Our boy Alden Ehrenreich is kind of this person who helps frame the story and push it along in the telling. There, even those castings are so kind of vital and good and add something. And Robert Downey Jr. gives one hell of a performance, and I know why people are talking about him and awards and things like that. But he proves to be this very compelling, I don't want to say too much of a character in the movie. And if you don't know your history, I mean, this is all Googleable about history, but still people will be like, it's a spoiler. I didn't learn it in school. But the character he plays in that transition was all very good. So yeah, I mean, it's weird. I guess I'm not trained to be this enjoyed by adult drama, cinema, old school Citizen Kane style movie making anymore. But this was definitely on that level and in that vein. And there's a lot more I want to talk about in my tinfoil spoilers section, so we'll wait for that. But Connor but at the same time, I think just let me say this. At the same time, I think it's a movie that'll be hard for me to re-access. I don't know. Me and my little brother were joking about this morning. It's like, oh, look what's on HBO, like playing on TV. It's Oppenheimer. Let me kill a few 3 hours, like rewatching this. I don't know how re-accessible this movie will be for me personally, and that's kind of the interesting thing about it, and what I want to get into with you guys is, how did you enjoy it, and how many times would you enjoy this movie again?
I love the movie, but I agree with you. Like, I sort of would classify this as like almost like a Schindler's List or a Passion of the Christ, where it's like it's a good movie. It's like just it's a fantastic movie. But man, if I wish we had a palate cleanser last night, like Barbie, to watch immediately afterwards, because since we didn't watch Barbie afterwards, I went home and just Googled gas masks and how much those cost. Because this is like a downer. It's a downer of a film for sure. So I agree with you that I definitely don't see myself rewatch. I might rewatch it more, like one more time. I'd like to go to IMAX one more time and watch it just because of the spectacle that Nolan puts on. But it's not a feel good movie for sure.
Yeah, Chris, I'm with you there where I think it's such an investment both in terms of time and in terms of you have to stay focused and listen in on all of these conversations for 3 straight hours. And there's very little break in between these 20-minute sections of just rapid fire dialogue between multiple characters, sometimes all in one room, sometimes spanning 3 different time periods. Overall, I think this is one of Nolan's best. I absolutely love this film. I think that I love Nolan, and if you ask me to list my 10 favorite films, 2 of them would be his. But I'm also in this weird spot where the film bro conversation surrounding him for the past decade or so has been exhausting. All the while, I would put everything post Inception as it's good, but each film is flawed in some way. Dark Knight Rises is a bit of a mess. Interstellar is his attempt at emotion, and it
Well,
kind of
hold on a second. Hold on a second.
let,
Let's not talk about Interstellar like that
let me
now.
monologue here for a second. Here, Interstellar. It's his attempt at emotion, and it doesn't always land. Dunkirk is great, but I've always argued that I don't know if that film loses anything if it had been told sequentially as opposed to the time frame it wanted to be in. I don't think he acquitted himself very well with how he handled Tenet, and the movie itself is great when it's a B style spy film, but it's also saying, hey, don't think too hard about this movie while we give you some really complex ideas to play with and a sound mixing where you can't understand what anybody is saying without subtitles. I have none of those qualms with this movie. And I think what stuck out the most to me was there is such a massive cast that when you start reading the list on Wikipedia, you literally have to start scrolling because there are so many name actors in this movie playing real historical characters. And the trick he plays with it is that sometimes Gary Oldman's probably my favorite of the, hey, you're on for a scene or two and you're going to steal that one scene you're in. Or it's actors where you're doing the DiCaprio, hey, I recognize who that person is, and they'll hang out in the background for a bit, and you'll be like, oh, are they just kind of playing a bit part in this? Emily Blunt's, she's in the background of a few shots before the camera actually focuses on her. You go, hey, wait a minute, that's Emily Blunt, and she's not really doing much in this movie. She's just kind of being angry and riding horses and being pregnant, and she doesn't get to do a lot. And then at one point you go, oh, that's why you cast her, because now this is her time to shine. And the best example of that is Robert Downey Jr., where for I'd say 2/3 of this film, he's really kind of underplaying the role he's got, to where you're like, where's the guy who had the charisma that helped Marvel take over the entertainment industry? And then in the last 30 minutes or so, you go, oh, there it freaking is. And you go, okay, this is that he's got 3 or 4 like Oscar worthy speeches where you go, this is the clip they're going to show whenever that awards show comes around. And yeah, it's I liken it to Kofi. You'll get a kick out of this. I thought this was Nolan's version of a Wu-Tang song, where it's like, hey, here's Ghostface, RZA, Method Man. Everybody in the lineup gets a turn with the mic, and when they do get their turn, they all kill it.
That's
that's the best way to describe it.
It's not bad. I mean, this is kind of a Wu-Tang concert of acting. Like, it is pretty true. And everybody brings like their own crazy flavor to it, like I said. And there are some people who, there are people we expect to like just come in and just be able to kill a scene, like Matt Damon. It's just so
every
good.
Every time he showed up, I had to do
general,
the America World Police thing. I was
Matt
Damon.
But I mean, you're talking about like people who are Oscar worthy people, like Florence Pugh just showing up for like this bit storyline in this, right? With all these,
Jack
all these
Quaid,
crazy
one
scenes.
of the Safdie brothers, Josh Peck. Rami Malek does nothing.
Malek,
and then at the end, he does the biggest thing, and you just fist bump and you start speeching. You're like, holy crap.
But it's just crazy how many people, like you said, Olivia Thirlby is even in this as like somebody with like a little kind of vignette arc about the female being a female person on the Manhattan Project. There's so many stories that you feel like you could do, and even just people showing up that we've just met, like Mayfish Schweihofer from Army of the Dead and Army of Thieves. Like, it's nuts.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
As Heisenberg. So it's crazy how stacked this is. And like you said, you're like at some points in it defies the movie star thing, because like you said, the first act of the film is Emily Blunt in this main kind of interview room scene where she's sitting behind, Cillian Murphy, who, I mean, fantastic. Like, I mean, this guy's been killing it for so long. It's hard to praise him. If you've ever watched Peaky Blinders or any of the stuff, he's like really, I mean, from 28 Days Later on, like, but this is, I mean, his big film that I'm sure people will be pointing to and nominating him for and giving him kinds of, the definitive thing of his career, because there is so much he does subtly with. And by the end of the film, and I think that was really a good kind of what they brought out, is just who J. Oppenheimer was and what was going on in his mind at all times throughout all this, which we'll get into in spoilers. But like, yeah, it is crazy how many people show up and cook in this movie, right? Like, it is pretty nuts. And Nolan's known for getting, big cast, but this is by far the biggest. And like you said, everybody has something to add and something to do. And just some great performances. I was trying to think of, David Krumholtz, who's also really great in this.
I also thought Matt Damon was incredible. I mean,
I said that a couple of comments back. Him and Jason Clarke. I mean, it just goes on. Like, once we start,
everybody's fantastic. I mean, it's definitely, I feel like, awards bait for sure. I mean, there's so many good just moments in the whole movie.
And I just kept thinking about how in lesser hands this could have been such a weaker film. It could have just focused around Los Alamos, where from start to end we see the bomb get built and that be it. But Nolan wanted to focus so much on the entirety of Oppenheimer's life, to where there's even the structure that he chooses with he's doing the nonlinear storytelling thing again. But unlike Dunkirk, the reveal as to why he did it towards the end hits you like a ton of bricks. And I just think so many directors wouldn't have even attempted something like that. They would have just said, hey, it's a bunch of dudes. They're building a bomb. The bomb went off. Yay, America. That would have been it. But no, he strove for more.
Now, this is
Yeah.
the spoiler-free version of the show, right? This is
Yeah,
why
this
we're-
part.
Yeah. Okay. So, what did you guys think of the black and white mix? You know, because there was definitely a part of me that thought like that might borderline on pretentious, but I really actually like seeing the way that he split the two timelines up. I really personally enjoyed it. I thought that it was a much clearer way to sort of signal which story we're getting, you know, compared to other Nolan movies, for example.
Well, that was the Memento. He went back to the Memento trick, right? Like that was the trick in Memento, was keeping track of like what was happening in the black and white stories and what was happening in the color stories and our perceptions of like what's happening in these stories and like where these kind of twists in perception come from. So I really did enjoy that and kind of enjoy what it did. I haven't even thought about it too much. There's so much to like break down about this film. My brain hurts like already. It took me just sleeping to get this far, but yeah, I mean, I think it really did do a good job, especially in the first act or two of, like you said, keeping it clear because there, and we're going to take a break and then get into spoilers about this, but like, it's hard to talk about, but like, yeah, the way this tells the story, the way it just tells this narrative of a biopic is fascinating just in and of itself and groundbreaking for most other filmmakers. As Connor said, like in lesser hands, this would have been either so bland and boring or a mess of an ambitious attempt, but Nolan nails it. So I think without further ado, let's just take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Oppenheimer in full spoilers. And that's going to be that because I have a lot to say when we can get into some details. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Comic Book Nation's bonus round episode where we are talking about Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. First half was our spoiler-free reactions. Now let's get into the meat and potatoes, our full spoilery discussion of this film. So as I said before the break, yeah, the narrative. So this movie kind of does the Nolan thing of Memento. There's a lot of this movie is kind of a masterpiece for Nolan in the sense that I feel like a lot of the tricks he learned over the course of all of his films are kind of things that we get brought out in here. I think he learned from some of the emotional stuff he didn't do so well in Interstellar that is a little bit more emotional in this one. There's a non-linear things he started to do in like Memento that really play well, even elements of like characters who see constant vision that we saw in Insomnia. Obvious things from the blockbuster lessons he learned from Batman and kind of playing with things like Inception. And so it's a hodgepodge of a lot of these things. But what it does, like Memento, that I thought was so fascinating was start kind of at the end of this person's life when they're old, start back at when they're young, keep moving both sides until it all hinges around this middle section, right? With this conversation between Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein. And the whole quote unquote, because it's Nolan films, there has to be a mystery and a twist, right? So I like that this wasn't too like crazy Shyamalan heavy in the mystery and twist, but that it did have this hook that kept us fascinated, which was what did these two say to each other at this pivotal conversation they had after Oppenheimer took over at this institute following World War II, right? And it's about in the end, it kind of does reveal, as we said, and as I was kind of trying to say, Cillian Murphy's Oppenheimer, there's a lot of these kind of resettings of perceptions about what Oppenheimer was trying to do once he had kind of invented this bomb and what Robert Downey Jr.'s character, who I want to start using these names because they're actual historical figures, Louis Strauss, was doing with, his attempt to discredit Oppenheimer through these kind of shady ways. And basically that this character was like very tormented in his knowledge of this theory that he was envisioning and what it could do and how much harm it could cause and how much that did torment and weigh on him throughout. And it's so hard to describe now, like just talking it back, but I feel like this movie is broken up into good thematic chapters, and each and how it works is why you can't get up is each chapter is its own little part of this kind of story with its own little arc and kind of thematic resolution that moves us to this other part. But even though we're getting different points of this man's life, they're just sequences in here that are just so well done in their pointedness. Like I remember one, as Connor was saying, like the rapid fire sequence where it cuts back forth through these different hearings and trials, but where they're really just kind of hammering home on, you know, Oppenheimer's morality and his ethical choices and what does that all mean. And it's pretty heavy-handed stuff. I mean, it's like the film usually like literally yelling a philosophy debate at us, but the way it's spliced together and how hard hitting the dialogue is and how it makes you feel this pressure, like almost like it's the particles in the building and this motif we see before you have this big explosion. And it's pretty nuts, man. Like that kind of thing was pretty wild in this movie. And I just remember looking around the IMAX theater in key points like that and just seeing like everybody, you guys, everybody else, just like on the edge of their seat, like, oh my God. And it's like literally just people talking, right?
Mhm.
So yeah. What do you guys have to say? My brain hurts just trying to
I think it's just such a very important film, right? But the doom and gloom of it all is definitely overwhelming. I mean, I don't want to get too much into the news about it all, but when you hear about, you know, James Cameron, there's an article that came out today about him talking about AI, and he's like, I warned you guys back in 1984.
Writing that on the next tab right here. Yeah, it's right here on the next tab.
Yeah, and then there's like there's the scientist that came out that was a proponent of climate change in the 80s. That's like, we're damn fools. It's here. We're too late. Like that. So it's a really depressing movie in the sense of like where it ends and that whole chain reaction speech that he gives at the end, where he's like, yeah, we thought we were going to light the atmosphere on fire, but there was a chain reaction and we're basically all screwed. So it's very despondent in that way, and which is a little depressing.
Rainy here today. We're never gonna be able to look at rain puddles, right? You know.
Right.
Yeah, but I did think, but I think it's an important movie, right? It's a very, like, the message that I think that Nolan is getting out, like thematically, the heart of it, I think, is really how dangerous, brilliant, or powerful men can be when their pride is damaged. Like that, to me, is what the movie was ultimately about. When you see all the damage that, you know, Strauss has done because he thought either Robert Downey Jr. or not Robert Downey Jr. Sorry, Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer was talking crap about him, or because he embarrassed him in that hearing. But then you also see it with Oppenheimer, right? Oppenheimer gets sort of embarrassed in class, and he's willing to like poison his professor. I mean, so it's like just the amount of damage that can be done when these powerful men have their pride hurt, I think, is sort of a theme that's really on display here that I think is an important lesson that I think a lot of, maybe not us common folk, but there's a lot of people that need to be aware of like what is happening and the result that can come from it. But that was my biggest takeaway from the film that I really enjoyed as a message that I thought Nolan was trying to get out there.
Yeah, Kof, you mentioned the tricks that Nolan picked up from his previous films that he used here. He used one from The Prestige. He tells you at the beginning of the movie that this film is about ripple effects when he shows you the raindrops hitting the water. And that goes all the way up until the final shots of the movie. I'm like, damn it, he did it again. He told us what this movie was about at the start.
Yep,
and
very
how
first images.
It's ripple effects of how people interact, how pride can be hurt, how when you take out revenge, other people react to that. How when you create something, it can be put in the hands of other people and used in ways you didn't want to, or you didn't quite understand what the ripple effect of your creation was going to lead to where Murphy's final shots are him gripping with the fact that he's changed human history now to where we have the capability of destroying all life on Earth. We've had the common sense not to so far, but now that is on the table, and that is a result of him. And him in and Cillian Murphy's eyes show the weight of that realization as he's staring into the water after talking with Einstein, and you just go, how can anyone deal with that? And then you understand why the last 40 minutes of this film aren't more after effects of the bomb. It's him trying to stop more bombs and bigger bombs from being created.
While
And it
nobody's listening to him, right?
exactly,
I thought it
no
was
one
so
cares.
like the Harry Truman scene is so important because you can almost see it in his
Oh
face
yeah.
where he's like, "We're screwed."
Mhm.
He knows, like seeing Truman the way that Truman's sort of gloating about the bomb, and he's like, "Nobody cares about who built the bomb. They only care about who dropped the bomb, and I dropped the bomb. Get this crybaby out of here." It's
Mhm.
it's so it's so fascinating watching Cillian Murphy's performance as a guy who realizes that he's developed this weapon that we cannot be trusted with. It is not, no matter what side you're on, whether it's the Nazis, whether it's America, it's too powerful for men in general.
Yeah, and getting
Yeah.
back to the structure, Kof, when you're talking about the different timelines merging, no one benefits from that more than Robert Downey Jr. To where I didn't think this movie needed a villain. I thought Clark was kind of that in the all the interviews where it's like, okay, this is clearly just Red Scare. We're doing the communism thing again, blah blah blah. And it's like, nope, actually, it was Robert Downey Jr. who's the biggest bastard in this whole thing, and he gets to have the big villain speech out of nowhere, and you're just sitting back and you're like, where the hell was this the whole time? He was just playing an old man sitting at tables.
Well, what
And
I
Yeah, just
also think is
waiting for his
brilliant too is that, like
confirmation.
he's a villain, but like they're all sort of villains, right? Like they all play their hand in it. I mean, we're talking about these guys who know, like there's a percentage of a chance that they're gonna light the atmosphere on fire, and they know, like they do not know what's gonna happen, and they still forge ahead with it. Like, there's so many opportunities throughout the movie for them to do the right thing and stop working on this, or to try to come together and like, we got to talk to Germany or Russia about this, and like this cannot happen, and they don't do it. It's all pride pushes them forward, and it's pride, and I would say fear in a lot of ways, but it's really incredible to watch. And you almost see history repeating itself currently, like, right, with like the AI situation. Like it's almost like happening all over again. And how are we gonna like get through this? But I think, yeah, Nolan has done a masterful job here. And it's scary. It's so scary.
I want to touch on what Connor said because now it's time for my tinfoil hat. Because Connor,
uh-oh.
my thing that I took away from the film was, not just the thing about prideful men and that whole thing, which is very scary, given world events, like as we're seeing older kind of men who have held power and what happens when they're kind of coming to the end of that or the possible end of that, and how crazy people will act and what it pushes them to do. But I always think that, Nolan is an artist, and there's a lot about all of his films when you watch them for enough time, which, I mean, like Inception, great movie. It's about, dream heisting and stuff, but it's also about like, the imagination and filmmaking itself and how we can or cannot kind of do that. And, there's a lot that I think he puts in of himself into his movies. And then this one is no different. I think in some ways this one is the most, as I was joking with my little brother today, like the most navel gazing in some ways, because I think Connor hit it on the head. One big theme in this is the theme of what you create and then put out in the world, and then what happens when you put it out in the world, right? And the unintended consequences. There's a big part of this movie that is them struggling in the Manhattan Project, dreaming this thing up, then physically getting it. I mean, the Manhattan Project is physically like a film set almost. Like it's a little town they construct. It's this place where they're working. It takes all these different people and teams of people with the expertise to put this thing together. That's just like a movie. But when you put it out there, and like when it's, as soon as it's done, right? And as soon as you have it in the box, then the studio's like, all right, great, thanks. Like we're taking this and we're going to decide how it gets used, how it gets distributed, like all this stuff. And then you get it out there in the world and people's reactions to it. And, there's this great scene as the night, Oppenheimer has to give this speech when the bomb is dropped on Hiroshima, and how he interprets what he sees in the crowd, right? There are all these different reactions he sees. Some people are madly cheering. Some people are, sick with it. Some people are not even caring. They're screwing under the bleachers or drinking, and
That
all.
scene too. It's so brilliant because of the way that like everybody's applauding and he can't hear it. Like it's just
Yeah.
like it's just drowned out in silence in his own in inner turmoil. It's beautiful. I just wanted to add
Yeah.
that part to it.
No, you're right. I mean, that's how it's filmed. It's a really intense scene. And there's a part of me that can't ignore that. I feel like there's something about this that has to do with him and his own kind of rumination on filmmaking. Because he's not just like, this isn't just a filmmaker, right? Like, this is Nolan. And there are some pretty pivotal things he did. Like, I think that there's a lot of this movie that he might deny to his dying day, but I think a lot of it has to do with making the Dark Knight trilogy and starting from this place where he was this unlikely guy picked for the project, right? Like, nobody in the beginning thought like he'd be the guy to head and bring back Warner Brothers Batman franchise and do that. But he gets in because he has this vision of this non-linear kind of crazy Batman story. And right from the bat, then they start making changes to it and things. Then they come back to him and like, we need you to get this masterpiece up. And he gets this other masterpiece up. And then from there, then it's just like, okay, now let's run with it. Let's just make everything dark and gritty. Like, let's make superhero movies. Let's do this. Let's do that. And then I feel like he ends up in this place where you now have him being like one of the biggest voices for, yeah, let's stop doing superhero stuff and get back to cinema. Like, I don't know. And I feel like part of this movie is about that, like, is about the regret of what you start when you put something out in the world and you don't intend. He's just like, oh, I just wanted to make like one, maybe two little movies and get out of this. Then I got caught in the studio system and then I had to do this. And then it spawned this whole thing that people are saying now is arguably killing cinema, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is a part of that, this movie, that's definitely about that. Now, is that a bit egotistical to put up against the atomic bomb? Possibly, but I don't think it's something that can be entirely separated either as kind of a message.
And it can be more than one thing, right? Like,
right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, yeah, this is art. Of course it can be more than one thing. And it's just like, and I think he would say, well, it's just about the nature of anything creative act, right? Like the entire nature of it, just whether it's a painting that becomes some cheap NFT, a movie you make that, Brian De Palma making Scarface and then everybody taking Scarface and being like, this is going to make me murder people and snort coke, and be like, well, I don't think that's what that movie was trying to tell you was the message of that movie, right? I think they're trying to tell you that kind of stuff is going to lead you to ruin and everything, but now it's the poster child for every wannabe thug in America and across the world. But, I think so. I think there is kind of an important and struggling message in that. Because I think one of the most haunting things for me at the film is the thing that actually Einstein tells Oppenheimer, right? And you get in that final montage about, yeah, you're going to get the awards and they're going to say all these things to you, but it's really about like them, and it has nothing to do with you. You're just being kind of put out to pasture, and they're going to take what you've done now and they're just going to run with it without you. And it's kind of, because that's kind of what happened to him, right? Like, that's what Oppenheimer, ironically, kind of did to him. Yeah.
To Oppenheimer, right. And Kove, when you had the run sheet and you said, oh, it's time for the tinfoil hat theory, it reminded me of when the first couple of trailers for this came out. And people were starting to throw out the theories of, did Nolan really make a movie about the nuclear bomb and try to make it about him making the Dark Knight? And I went, God, I hope not, because if you thought the conversation surrounding Nolan was exhausting before, get ready. I don't think I definitely see the parallels between creating something like this and seeing the ripple effects versus creating a film and seeing how it is absorbed by society and then what becomes of that. It's not a perfect one-to-one of the Dark Knight trilogy, because if it was, then the next town over would have made the exact same bomb the time he made the Dark Knight, and that bomb would have become the thing that dominates war and not his.
I mean, isn't that sort of what we were getting with the hydrogen bomb, though?
Well, here's the thing:
is that I feel like that was sort of what they were getting at a little bit.
Kind of, but like Marvel is what really when people say, "Oh, there's too many superhero movies," they're talking about Marvel. They're not necessarily talking about Nolan because there's been a hell of a lot more Marvel content than there's been
Well,
his stuff.
I think this film really hit me because I was starting in I started in this industry in the year that Iron Man and The Dark Knight came out. And
2008.
what happened after that? Yeah. What happened after that? And I remember this so vividly was yeah, Marvel was still working on their phase 1 plans, but nobody really believed they were doing something, but that was still far off. It was Nolan and The Dark Knight that made people say, "Oh, when it made $1 billion, people were like, that changed everything." People were like, "Oh, superheroes are legit. They can make big money. They can be, remember, they can be cinema," was that whole thing, just grounded and dark and gritty. And that was the key that made people really start running with this idea that these things could be the next big blockbuster ownership in entertainment. And it was before Marvel got there. Marvel just came into the stretch through a very, very messy phase 1 experience, and then hit that stride with Avengers 1 in 2012, where $1 billion now just became the standard. It wasn't, and this became a franchise that could then just keep repeating those things. It wasn't just one film. It was just now the formula. And that's what Marvel got. But Marvel really got that run and that the belief system behind it from Nolan. Right. And they tried everything to get Nolan to keep building a bigger bomb. The Nolan, the original DCEU was supposed to be the Nolan Snyder kind of collective, the two of them. And it was a whole kind of Nolan's kind of non-linear, heady braining, Snyder's visuals and all of that stuff was going to be the ultimate combination.
Steel, right?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. That was
honestly,
that was the tempo there. They were almost going to do it together, and then Nolan was the one who said, "You know what? I'm out. I did a trilogy, and I'm out."
If we're doing, if this is all 1-to-1, Safdie is Zack Snyder in the movie, where he's like, "Hey, I want to make this other bomb," and Nolan's like, "Oh, I'm kind of involved in this, but then I'm not really." And it's actually, I want to get out of this. So that Safdie's not really Marvel. Safdie's, DC.
No, I thought Marvel was just not to be a joke, but Marvel was like the Nazis. It's the thing they knew they were competing against. Because at the time, I think that was a lot of the thing about The Dark Knight Rises. Nolan was like, "Can I just tell this story and leave it like this? And he's dead. And can I get out?" And they're like, "No, we got to keep this franchise going. We're building this franchise over here. Look what they're doing over there. We got to keep this thing going." And that's why they kind of pushed him into doing the third. And he was very reluctant to do the third, if you remember that time period. I'm sorry, Chris, you were going to say something?
Well, I just feel like maybe it would be more akin to say that Marvel's Russia. But now that you've got this brilliant parallel, though, I do want to sit down and be like, okay, so if Nolan is Oppenheimer, who are these other characters?
Well, that's where the comparison starts falling apart, because who the hell is Florence Pugh in this? Is Nolan outing himself as unfaithful to his wife?
We don't want to get into we do not. We need a whole separate podcast for Nolan's women issues,
and that's the biggest
directors who work with their wives or siblings, and how that begins to show up as motifs in movies, right?
Right.
Why is every female person?
Actually, that's very interesting, because he also has a little brother that he's always wanting to work with, and that
exactly.
There's so much.
No,
Kobe, I think you're right.
No, I think a good artist picks things that they know can be, if you're doing good art, you're picking things that work on 4 or 5 levels, right? So there's definite parallels in here, but there's enough wiggle room to be like, that's not what I'm doing. But
and a lot of the parts of the movie that we're talking about, this comparisons, that's 1 hour of the 3 hours of this, where it's a lot of that first hour, there's especially that first 15 minutes where it feels like I'm watching Tree of Life, where it's hey, here's a guy staring up at the sky and atoms, and it's hey, here's electrons flying by. It's okay, this is a lot to ask for a summer film. But it's a lot of the comparisons only fit into a small part of this big ass project.
Yep, and that's why it's a Citizen Kane type movie, man. There's I think what I said is just as valid as what Chris just, his breakdown of it, and they exist in this movie where there's 3 hours of content to support both things, and you could keep picking different scenes, characters, moments, and analyzing this for so long. Like it's pretty gnarly.
Now, do
Yeah.
you guys? I mean, we all seem to love it, but do you have any like criticisms of it that have come to mind since watching it, 12 hours ago?
I do, and it's getting back to Nolan is he is the inverse of Spielberg in a lot of ways, in that Spielberg
Yeah.
is about emotion.
Yeah.
Nolan is pure function. His movies, the perfect movie for him is guys in suits having a little bit of banter, getting a job done. That's what Inception is. That's what, honestly, that's kind of what his Batman movies wind up being at certain points. That's what this movie is. So when it
Tenet,
dives
yeah.
into when it dives into things like relationships, it's like it's like a robot trying to read poetry. It doesn't quite click. Where
Yeah. I
like
want to
the
ask
Florence,
about that.
the Florence Pugh sex scenes are
That's
like
what I want to. Oh
this
wait,
is
yeah.
perfectly functional. Is there any romance or like sexual desire in this scene? None.
No, and I don't want to see another Nolan sex scene. I want to talk a little bit about Florence Pugh in this movie. Yeah, I don't want to see another Nolan
No,
sex scene. I'm okay.
I never need to see that.
I thought, in our all our not even twisted, but our normal actress, hot actress, talented actress fantasies were like, oh, this will be something this is why my Mr. Skin stays in business. But this was like, yeah, I was like, please don't do this again. Like, just have a conversation. It was much more sexy and less uncomfortable than you trying to film a sex scene, please.
Yeah.
But that's what I said about Interstellar. It was like, Interstellar was a movie where I quote and people went nuts on me. But I was like, Interstellar is a movie that makes me think Chris Nolan reads like theoretical science manuals to his kids as bedtime stories. You know what I mean? Like, and I was just like, I don't know if he has that emotional thing. It makes him a brilliant technical director, but like, yeah. I didn't, yeah, but Florence Pugh's role in this, and I don't know the history, so I'm approaching this as cinema right now. But her character, what did you guys make of that whole thing? Because I think that's one of the more ambiguous and confusing parts of the movie. Jean
Yeah,
Tatlock.
I was going to bring up the whole Florence Pugh thing too, as far as my criticism goes. And I'm one of those guys that as soon as I watch a movie, especially something that's based on real life, I mean, I spent like 2 hours going on Wikipedia and reading about all of the real life people. Florence Pugh's character being one of them, Jean something, I'm forgetting her name, but
Jean Tatlock.
yeah, so there was so much more to her, and what is in the film is accurate, but I felt like it was, and maybe it's just, I mean, it's a 3 hour movie, right? So I mean, you got to make choices, but I did feel like, I think there was an emotional connection that Nolan wanted us to make with Oppenheimer's relationship with her, that I think it goes so fast that it was kind of impossible to really like get to that core of that relationship, and what ends up happening to her and how upset Oppenheimer is. I think we spent so little time with them, and the little bit of time that we do spend is so uncomfortable that you don't really understand why he is as upset as he is. And when reading about the real life history, I mean, it's clear that they had a lot more time that they spent together than they do in the film. Yeah. And so, yeah, that didn't really hit for me. I almost feel like that's something that you could have just probably removed entirely, or maybe touched upon a little, like, because they kept calling him a womanizer, right? But there's only like really 2 women in the movie that you see him have any interaction with, and so I didn't feel like they presented Oppenheimer as the womanizer that they keep claiming that he was.
Yeah. Now, Chris, in your research, did she get murdered? Was it a suicide, or was there ambiguity there?
Ambiguity.
I just read up on it. Yeah, finally, there was ambiguity. And the thing I think that movie's trying to illustrate and what he's imagining, because I was like, did he murder her? Like, what is this? But I think what he's imagining and what the theory is because of her, and it's comes back to like Casey Affleck's character in this, is that the theory is that there's a possibility that because of her heavy communist associations and her closeness with Oppenheimer, that even though he might not have done anything, that people surrounding the Manhattan Project, like the Matt Damons and Casey Afflecks of it all, might have had her killed.
I also wish that a little bit of, I wish Nolan had taken just a little bit more time earlier to talk about the difference between the communist US party versus communist Russia, because every time they were talking about communism in the movie, until a lot later on, I assumed that they're talking about Russia communism, and I wasn't really up on my history in the fact that there was a United States Communist Party at the time.
Yeah.
And I
I
don't
was just
think
talking
that was
about
made
this.
very clear in the film.
No, you have to know a fair amount of history. I was talking about this with somebody in a bar last night, but yeah, you have to know that like and I taught like post World War II history and literature for a while. The bottom line is that every generation there's this swing between like political groups and which ones they're like the rise of either left or right leaning political groups. And after World War II, leading into World War II and afterwards, there was definitely like an American Socialist Party. And then that's where the kind of, when the Red Scare happened, that's kind of what McCarthyism and that whole kind of political sentiment rose up around against. And it was just people who were like mostly Hollywood actors, hippies, people like that, who just didn't believe in the capitalist system and wanted to flirt with ideas of socialism and do all this stuff. But then, of course, when the Soviet Union became our enemy after World War II, that all got flipped and kind of became this whole other thing. And some people did go full into the kind of Soviet communist leanings, but some people were just like, well, oh crap, I was just part of this party and exploring ideas. And then they got followed and on lists. And yeah, so a lot of academics and free thinkers and like people like Oppenheimer who were just, I consider everything, and you don't know where they're leaning, but they got on list and all that stuff happened. So yeah, it was pretty nuts. It was pretty wild. And like, yeah, Hoover would just put you on a list and send people to go through your trash can and start following you.
Now, Chris, let me ask you guys this. Have either of you seen Barbie?
Not yet.
No.
I sure wish I got to watch it last night.
So instead of the Barbenheimer conversation, let's ask this. Where does this rank on your movies of the year right now? Since we can't really have the Barbenheimer conversation.
I like to do it two parts. I like to do movies of the year and within Nolan movies.
Okay.
Which I think I put in the rundown. I believe so. Yeah, that's a good way to get out of here. I mean, like I said, if anything, Oppenheimer has been this weird reminder that like adult cinema is a thing. And not just at like sappy Oscar season movies, but like actual narratively challenging, kind of visually stunning and compelling adult cinema, like Citizen Kane's. There's a lot about this that reminds me of when we were talking about of Requiem for a Dream is another one, like great movies, great performances, subject matter, but I don't know if I'll ever sit down and watch it again much.
Now, I would be terrified by an Aronofsky version of this. Holy crap.
Oh, God, yeah. It would be mostly particles. It would be mostly particles. Yeah. But, yeah, and so it's a weird experience because, like, it's so rare that we get this from movie theaters anymore. So it was just more like, oh, yeah, I did used to like this. And that's why I was joking in the beginning, like, it is good to like get you guys together and have like a conversation about cinema. We're Comic Book Nation, but it's interesting to actually dissect and take down a really challenging kind of character portrait film. So I think it was just kind of a reminder that, yeah. And then maybe this is the point Nolan also wants to remind us, like, yeah, we can go to cinema and just see stuff like this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good reminder.
Yeah. So far, I'm pretty steadfast that Spider-Verse has been my favorite movie that I've seen this year, but I think this is probably the most relevant movie of the year as far as the current times we see ourselves in. I think that I think it's a very important movie, and I think that it's time that we've had a movie like this that really reminds us of how devastating, nuclear war and these, powerful men in powerful positions and how dangerous they can be if we elect the wrong people. I think that's an important message to get out.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think it is my second favorite film of the year. I think Spider-Verse was, people will slap it's just a comic book story. It's a triumph of animation, and it is a collection of so many different styles of animation and storytelling coming together and delivering a excellent experience that it's a testament to its greatness that it is an incomplete story, yet a total complete theater experience.
Mm-hmm.
I would only put this a notch below that for it's Nolan firing on all cylinders. In terms of the Nolan hierarchy, like I view his 2005 run with Batman Begins to his 2010 run with Inception, like I still see that as his prime, to where there are directors who will spend their entire lives never touching that streak. And that's, I mean, that's the kind of the first chapter of his career, ironically. It's the, I'd say I would not put this above Dark Knight. I wouldn't put it above Inception. But if you ask me to have that be his number 3, absolutely.
Yeah, I think I would say for me, it is still Dark Knight, then Inception, then Memento. Then I would put this after Memento, because I think Memento is such an important film still, and like what it did and just what it opened, the doors it opened. But I think those are like his top 4 films, and then after that it gets really debatable and like kind of where you want to shift things around. But yeah, I think it's up there with his best because, like you said, it is him firing on all cylinders. And I think ironically, this has low key been the film that breaks Nolan out of the mold of he can only, like, we keep, for a while he was getting that Shyamalan thing where we were coming to him expecting like the same thing every time. Non-linear, technical movie, big twists, you know, all that stuff. And this one is just kind of him now just making movies and kind of getting into it. I feel like even deeper into his auteur era, where this is like what a Nolan movie will be. And he's entering a new phase where he could be making movies like this for the next phase of his career and pick compelling subjects, both in terms of people and, you know, subject matters, whether they're real historical or just, you know, maybe even like a good fictional portrait, something, or just something like a little more P.T. Anderson stuff like The Master, things like that. Like I would be interested in seeing him kind of go down this lane a little bit more because, yeah.
I think this broke him out of the period where he was reacting to different criticisms in his films, where I would say from 2011 to 2021, he was making movies where, whether it's, oh, you don't like how Bane's voice sounds and you want me to change that? Fine. I'm going to make Tenet where you can't understand this unless you were watching it in IMAX. Oh, you think I can't do emotion? Well, I'm going to make Interstellar, which reads like Data trying to read a poem in Star Trek.
I like Interstellar so much better.
A lot of people do, but but some people don't.
Yeah, it's his most divisive film by far.
Yeah, and I just like, this was the first time where it felt like he's not trying to react to anybody's criticisms. He's not trying to prove people wrong. He's just trying to make a great film. And he nailed that.
Do you guys think Oscar chances for, I mean, do you think, because this is summer release, which is bold if you're going for Oscars, because people's memories are so bad and short, and they usually end up voting for whatever movie came out the week before they had to vote. Yeah. Do you guys see Oscars chances for this, and whom amongst the cast would you see getting them?
I mean,
I'll say,
sure.
Oh yeah. Cillian definitely, Downey definitely. I've said Gary Oldman needs that Glenn Gary.
RDJ, yeah.
Now, RDJ for supporting, Cillian for main. I
would say Emily for supporting too.
Adapted screenplay, since it's based off the book.
Yeah.
Soundtrack, score, editing, makeup.
Yeah.
Best picture,
production
best
design,
director.
Costuming. Yeah, all that.
This will pop up in a lot of categories. It might not win all of them. It might win a handful, but it's going to get a lot of them.
Do you think anybody might possibly nab a supporting nod just based on like one or two scenes, like Gary Oldman?
Said Oldman. I tweeted that out today. I said Oldman needs that Glenn Gary, Glenn Ross, Alec Baldwin nomination for like one scene, because like, Jesus Christ, what a scene.
I think Downey,
the things he makes you feel for like, just nailing like Harry Truman in like a portrait within like one scene, and just the mind state of the man who did this, and, you know, how he looked at it, and all the subtle things that I like they did about, you know, they didn't get into it heavily, but like him being able to drop this bomb on Japan versus Europe and all of that. And you could just see how he probably viewed those people, like, you know, as not people. He was just like, yeah, we bombed them. And he was just like, all right. And just the vileness of that, like in that scene that that Oldman, and just the talk about a villain, like the menace in that just little speech about you think they care about who created the bomb, like that whole thing. I think he definitely deserves a nod for that. Like that's pretty gnarly.
I don't know. I think Downey looms so large over the non-Cillian actors that he gets that nod, and they might be like, we're not going to nominate like 3 people from the same movie.
I think
for
they
one
might.
category."
That's the thing, though. I think they might. I think Oppenheimer might be the movie that I'm trying to think of, like what else is coming out this year, but I think Oppenheimer might be the one where they just like it gets a ton of nominations. How many it will win, but like yeah, it could flood some acting categories with like supportings, right? So we'll see. I'm kind of interested now, but I'm never going to see this again. I don't think. All right. So there we are. We are halfway through summer. It's been a crazy year of ups and downs for movies. But I think we would recommend all of you go out. If you're listening to this and you're just kind of trying to decide if you're the rare breed of person who's listening to this and going to listen, you don't care. Because, I mean, it is weird to say this is a spoilers movie when it's history. But, like, if you just wanted to know about the movie and whether you should see it, I think the bottom line is I would say this is one we should see. I think we're fully supportive of the whole Barbieheimer weekend experience. Go see both these movies, but this is one to definitely see in IMAX. There are certain shots in this, just of the desert, even, which are landscapes, which are just stunning to see. And yeah, I think it is something, if you're a real cinema fan, as we are here sometimes, you should definitely check this out. I mean, this is one of those things you can't miss this year. So that is our full review, spoilers review, and discussion of Oppenheimer, or as I said in a tweet, a movie I believe they should have called Call Me Oppie, because pretty much the amount of times we heard that in this movie, I was just like, oh man, yeah, they should just say that, Call Me Oppie. But yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Connor Casey and Chris Cillian, for hopping in and going to see the movie and hopping on today to talk about it and break it down with us. This is Comic Book Nation, and if you guys are just hopping on for these bonus episodes on the topics of the films and subjects we're kind of covering, be sure to subscribe to Comic Book Nation on our YouTube page, and it's Comic Book _Nation, and subscribe to our Twitter feed for as long as that lasts, and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platforms. We will be back. Our regular episodes, live shows are every Friday at noon Eastern time on the Comic Book Twitch page and our YouTube page. And you guys should definitely jump into those because, man, we have great fans, great discussions, and our fans get into it as we are doing the show and help us get on topics, you know, talk and interact, and it's a good time. So join that community and be a part of it. Otherwise, this has been Comic Book Nation's bonus round episode talking about Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. Connor Casey and Chris Cillian, let the people know where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at ConnorCaseyCB, still working on that Threads account, and you can catch me on this show every Friday.
I'm on Twitter at Chris Cillian, and the name is spelled, what is it, right there? And then on Instagram and Threads at CK Comedy. And you can, check out the Daily Distraction YouTube channel if you're into some daily shorts and all the interviews that we do. It was pretty fascinating as we were getting all these cameos from Oppenheimer, where I was getting low key excited because I've talked to so many of those people. I think the only people that I haven't interviewed in that movie was probably Matt Damon and Emily Blunt at one point or another. So that was
all right. So yeah,
all of those.
Check out all of Chris Cillian. That was your humble way. That was your humble way of saying check out all Chris Cillian's interviews with all the biggest stars of Oppenheimer on the Daily Distraction page and comicbook.com. They want me to wrap this up in 60 minutes, and I got another 20 seconds. So let's just say, Oppenheimer, you the bomb. Oppenheimer, you the bomb. Oppenheimer, you the bomb. We all probably gonna die. All right, this has been Comic Book Nation. We'll see you guys next time. Peace.
Matt Damon.